So welcome everybody to the March NetBox Community Call. We've got a ton of stuff for you today, and as per usual, we've got two fantastic speakers. If you have any questions as we're going through, drop them in the chat, either for me or for our speakers, and either I will try and interject an opportune moment, or we'll just wait until the end of the guest speaker presentations to answer some of those. Normally, as some of you know, I'm co-hosting this with Richard Boucher. Richard Boucher won't be here today, so it's just me flying solo. So I'll do the best I can. Let's get into it. So it's the same lineup as per ever. We're going to look at upcoming events. We've got a whole bunch of NetBox news and some particularly important news around how we're restructuring things and slightly bigger scope there. Then we're going to hear from our speakers, Ewen and Denis, more news on them a little bit later. And then at the end, as per usual, we're going to be asking for you to share your own story on one of these. We're actually doing pretty good for lining up speakers. I think we're booked up through May now, but we've got options there. We can either book further out into the year, or we can just have 3 speakers per event and then do it that way. For those of you who've been here before, you'll know kind of what type of talks we have. But for those of you who might be new, we really don't have any rules for what you can talk about. It should be sort of NetBox related or NetBox adjacent. We do not expect fancy slides. As long as it's interesting to this group, which is basically a bunch of network and automation nerds like myself, then it's probably good. But we'll come back to some more of that at the end. So let's get into upcoming events, some things for your calendars. We've got this one. So obviously AI is peak hype right now. We've got some news on this because we're investing in this heavily here at NetBox Labs. There's a bunch of open source stuff coming up that you can use as well. We've got March 13th. So what day is it today? It is the 11th today. So on Thursday, we've got this event. If you click the QR code or scan the QR code down there, you can go and sign up for this, where Chris Beavers, our CEO, is going to be talking through a bunch of what we're seeing. Like NetBox Labs, we get to speak to hundreds of companies that are, trying to figure out what AI might be useful for in the networking space. Some of them already being successful with it. Some of them sort of dipping their toes in the water. We're also going to be going through some of the new things that we're releasing here at NetBox Labs. A bunch of them are available to community edition users as well. So check that out if you are AI curious or AI informed and curious what we're doing about it. Next up is this. So some of you will have seen the Drift webinar that we did. I don't remember when we did it. Actually, I'm going to say probably a couple of months ago. This is all around NetBox assurance, really, but the broader theme of how do you get NetBox into a good state? And then how do you keep it in a good state? So anybody who's running NetBox for any amount of time will know as soon as you've got all the data in there, it's out of date because people are changing the network or things are breaking, fires happen, backhoes happen, and everything else. This is going to be covering that whole area of how do we keep a network source of truth up to date? How do we use NetBox Discovery for this, which is now open sourced? How do we use NetBox Assurance in this area to make sure that we can make decisions around what we put into NetBox, even when we're getting all these different signals from the network. So scan the QR code or go to netboxlabs.com/events to learn more about that one. All right, NetBox news. So there's a lot on here. I'm going to go from top to bottom. Actually, let me go from bottom to top. So evolving open source operations for the NetBox ecosystem. Jeremy Stretch, who, as you all know, is the godfather of NetBox and works here as one of our founders, put together this blog post, and it really talks about how we're changing the way that we manage NetBox here at NetBox Labs. Basically, it's all good news. So you may not know this, but there are 4 times as many engineers working on NetBox now as there were 2 years ago. They all focus on, all of the things in the standard minor releases like 4.2 that came out in December, early January, and then 4.3 that's coming up. But increasingly, we're broadening the scope of what that team is responsible for. So, traditionally, we were focused entirely on making sure that NetBox was working and updated and had great new features. But, when I say great new features, it also includes an increasing number of things that sit around NetBox, like NetBox branching, NetBox change management, and a whole bunch of other things that are on the way, like service mappings that I'll get back to later on, or anyway, I'll come back to that. So as this sort of constellation of things that all relate to NetBox grows, we're widening our focus on that. It would also include things like PyNetBox, the Ansible collection, and all these other things that people rely on to be able to get value out of NetBox. Jeremy's stepping away from the front line. He's not going to be the person that's triaging the hundreds of issues that we get all the time and everything else. That's being blended into a team role. Got a specific manager on that, a specific engineering manager on that, and then the whole team helping out. And Jeremy's going to be picking up some various tasks, like he worked on branching last year and other sort of super strategic areas where his brain will be really useful. I think from a NetBox user perspective, basically all you're going to see is more of the same, like more features, more releases, faster bug fixes, etc. But it's an exciting phase for us. So if you've been with NetBox for a while, or even if you're new to it, I'd say go read that blog, and you can see how we're changing things here at NetBox Labs to make sure that the open source NetBox keeps getting better. Next up, 2 new ways to use AI with NetBox open source today. So check that out. What we're really trying to do is get ahead of this AI curve by making it easier for people to experiment with AI with NetBox. So there's 2 things in there specifically, but I would recommend reading the blog. The first one is llms.txt. So if you don't know what an llms.txt is, it's like the robots.txt that we use to put on websites to tell search engines how to index our content. llms.txt is kind of like that, but it's used to explain a specific tool and its APIs and its data models to LLMs so that they can interact with it more intelligently. So that helps you to, pass things like that to ChatGPT and then be able to have intelligent conversations with ChatGPT or any of these other tools about NetBox. The other one is something called MCP. I'm not going to go into all of that now, but they're all under the same umbrella, which is make it easier to do NetBox stuff with AI. So I'd recommend going and checking that out if you're interested. Next up is extensible integration support for NetBox Discovery Agent. So NetBox Discovery was released, I think, at the end of December. It allows you to do network discovery, so like a big Nmap to go and find all the active IPs in a network and then push those through Diode into NetBox. It also does device discovery, which is using Napalm under the hood to pull specific device information from the network and send them to NetBox or to NetBox Assurance. And then we have this third category, which is controller discovery, which is speaking to things in your infrastructure for which we need to go through an API. So you'll have seen us recently talking about like vCenter integrations and Juniper Mist integrations and Catalyst Center integrations and Microsoft DHCP. And we're doing 25 of those in 2025. But you can now also easily add your own. So what this blog post is all about is making your own discovery agents to do kind of whatever you want. And when you do that, it means not only do you get all of the scheduling and configuration management stuff that comes with the NetBox Discovery Agent, but it also means that it'll automatically be able to do things like send it through to Diode and NetBox Assurance and everything else. So if you're interested in that kind of ecosystem stuff, go and check that out. And then the last one is related. So these discovery agents run in what are called orb agents. Orb isn't very important for now, but just think about it as a very smart Docker container that does stuff. This latest release, which I think literally came out last night, is about solving a problem with configuring these agents at the moment. So at the moment, the way it works is you would deploy these agents in your infrastructure and you would have to deploy a static config file alongside them that gets mounted at runtime to tell them how to behave. Obviously, if you've got a lot of these agents or if you're changing those configurations often, that can be a bit of a pain. So now you can drive all of that from Git. And what that means is you can choose a Git repository where the configuration for all of these agents lives. And then the agents will reach out to that Git repository to pull their configuration in real time so that you can, do pull requests or branching or whatever it is you want to do in Git, have your colleagues review these configurations. And then once they're merged, all of the agents will start behaving in the correct way. So this is a bit of a tee up to something that's coming out later in the year called Fleet Management, where you'll be able to do all of this through NetBox. But it's a super useful capability that we're introducing. And generally, this all speaks to kind of a focus that you'll see in this blog down at the bottom here, which is, increasingly to get things done with NetBox, you're having to use it's desirable to use a bunch of other tools. You may be integrating into things that are already in your network management stack. You might be using NetBox Assurance or branching or all of these other things. So as we move forward, our typical minor releases are going to include the usual updates to NetBox, right? Like feature, like enhancement requests and bug fixes and everything else, but then also a bunch of this peripheral stuff. So you're going to see a focus, sort of a widening focus on the ecosystem in these community calls as we move forwards. So that was quite a lot. If there are any questions about any of that, as I said earlier, please drop them into the chat and we can come back to them, but I would recommend reading through those. In general, as you've probably noticed, we're not slowing down here at NetBox Labs. So, I'm looking forward to the day when we're going to have to split the news across 2 slides, but for now, it just about fits on 1. Couple more things for you. NetBox Assurance, as I've mentioned a couple of times, has gone into private preview. So if you are interested in all of this stuff, which is basically comparing what's in NetBox to what's coming in from discovery and making decisions about what you want to go into your network, super helpful if you're getting NetBox populated for the first time. Super helpful if you've already got NetBox populated and you're trying to update it with new information from the network, but in a controlled manner, then check it out. All of these agents that we're announcing all work with Assurance. And like I said, we're going to do 25 of these in 2025. So we're definitely going to need 2 slides for this over time. But if it's interesting, it's in private preview. So you can drop us an email at product@netboxlabs.com. If you haven't been in one of the private previews before, you can think of it basically like a sort of working group. We'll reach out to you, understand your use case a little bit more. If it's a good use case, we'll get on the phone with you and then start talking through how this might be able to solve your problems. And really, the reason for doing this is that the feedback you give us in the private preview goes directly into the product roadmap. So if this is something that you think you might want to use or you might want to use in the future, this is a good opportunity to speak to the product team at NetBox Labs directly and tell them about your use cases so we can keep that in mind as we're building the rest of it. I think this is the last one. So this is another thing that's coming in the 4.3 timeline. So around about April. This is NetBox Custom Objects. So Custom Objects is approaching private preview, but we've already had a bunch of conversations about this. If you were in the service provider working group last year, we've probably contacted you about this. Like very often when you're using NetBox, you find yourself in this situation where you would like to make relationships between objects. So you might want to have, for your business, there might be something called a customer, right, that you want to map. And maybe a customer for you is a bunch of switch ports and some contacts and a BGP session and an IP. Or like, it doesn't really matter what it is. Up until today, the ways to do that in NetBox have been, there've been a couple of ways, but they're not ideal. One approach is to put a custom field on all of those objects that you want to make a relationship between, and then kind of track that outside of NetBox. But that can get really tricky at scale. You end up with a lot of JSON custom fields all over the place. The other approach is to build a plugin, which is great, but it's difficult for some people, and you also have to maintain it. So one of the things that we noticed is a lot of the reasons why people build plugins is just to extend the data model or to add new objects. Like a classic example of this is the NetBox plugin cookie cutter Git repo, where you basically build like an ACLs plugin. What we're trying to do is find this sweet spot where for a lot of these use cases, you could just do something in NetBox. So that's what NetBox Custom Objects is. Imagine being able to define your own object types with arbitrary relationships to other objects. So you could create a new custom object type called customer, and that customer could have a name and an ID and some kind of choice field and an IP and a VM, or one or many relationships, uniqueness relationships, whatever you want to specify. And that's coming up real soon. So like I said, probably landing in the April timeframe. If you're interested in this, same deal. Send us an email at product@netboxlabs.com. We'll go through the use case with you, see if we can find a match between what you're trying to do and what we're doing. And then obviously you get to have a say in how we build this too. A lot of updates today. And we're now to our first speaker. Like I said, if you have any questions about anything I've said so far, you can either use the emails that we've got, product@netboxlabs.com, or you can drop something into the chat. But now we're going to go to our speakers for the day. And I see that Ewen is very well prepared, already come on camera. How's it going, Ewen?
I'm all right. I'm coping well enough for 3 a.m.
Apart from the fact that it's 3 a.m. Yeah, we've had Dave Kempy on here a couple of times doing a similar kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked closely with Dave Kempy on a few projects.
Yeah, I thought as much. All right, very good. Well, I'll let you take over from here. Ewan's going to be talking about CAD to NetBox. Go for it.
Thanks. Greetings from down under. CADBloke is yet another way of getting unrelated or related data from a place you never expected. It has a website. Let me work out how to share. I'll just interrupt your sharing and find my screen. Share. I hope you guys can see this. Yep, good. Okay, it has a website. One of the few domain names I actually put a website behind, CAD2netbox.com. You can read about it, and there's a contact form at the bottom of the page if you want to get in touch with me. I have a website, similar story, and Cable Schedules is an app I'll show you which runs the data extraction from AutoCAD. That has its own website as well. Getting right into it, here is CAD to NetBox. This is a wiring drawing for an actual real system at Foxtel. And this is a computer with network connections here in its drawing. There's a connecting drawing that goes to the other side. And this is CAD to NetBox. Basically, this is the data in NetBox and CAD compared to each other. The top row is the actual computer. The other rows are the connections that come from the computer. And if I scroll across here, sorry about all the scrolling. These monitors are 4K, so I don't know how you guys lived in 1920, whatever the 1080 it is, yeah. So as you can see here, NetBox, the connection on the computer at the other end as well on the switch. And you can go to any one of these devices. Like I said, screen resolution. This is the next one down. Same thing. You can do a system-wide comparison. Here is the cable scheduler app I was talking about, and this is filtered for that rack that those computers are in. And this is a bit of a report on what's going on in NetBox. There's a couple of mistakes. Any color highlighting you see are discrepancies. That's basically the gist of it. It's a fairly short sort of demo, but the other thing you're probably interested in is the CAD to NetBox.NET API. That was a lot of fun trying to generate an API out of Swagger that generates basically a pile of junk. And here is the API client. This is all closed source, by the way, so I'll show you a bit of source. This is how you get a device out of the NetBox API. You'll see these cache things here. You can actually cache all of the devices, interfaces, and things like that, any sort of any object, so you can query it locally without having to hammer NetBox to death. This is a device I constructed here from the device in AutoCAD with all the properties that I'm now adding to NetBox, and it returns a device which I displayed in that in the XAML grid we had before. The .NET API also does queries. You can make a query using the query types. There's different query types. They match all the NetBox query types, API query types. You can build yourself a query, run the query, and return whatever objects you wanted and work with them in .NET. This is actually where I initiated the cache. So this is where you set up a .NET's API. Fill the caches. These are just throwaway variables. The cache is actually stored there. Now the model for the .NET model for the API client, I added a few nested fields automatically, by the way. So every devices have interfaces. They don't natively appear on an API call, but what you can do is tell it to go and get the devices for this, the interfaces for this device, and it will fetch them, add them to that, and it'll also actually return the list of interfaces as a property as well. So that was just to make life a bit easier, a lot less things to have to remember. The whole idea of the API client is that you don't have to remember too much. You just basically make object calls. That's what .NET's all about. This is one of those nested properties. You can see all the document comments here. They come from the YAML files that the API generates, and also the source code for NetBox. I go into the source code to retrieve those. So most of this sort of stuff has comments on it. So when you're using the API client, you can actually see what the hell's going on. Back to the this is the actual interface for it. This is just to show you that when you're using the CAD to NetBox, any error conditions and things like that, there's a lot of different coloring going on. So it draws your attention to any discrepancies just visually. Alrighty, back to .NETBox. This is actually .NETBox itself. I should show you this V1 is the one that Swagger generated. It's the models, but once you start getting down, there's like different. You got cable, nested cable. There was a writable cable as well somewhere. This is why I didn't stick with Swagger too much and use my own API client generator, because I just wanted one object for a cable, not like 3 or 4 that I had to try and figure out which one is which. This is another example of adding a device. So here we are here, the device, which is the object. Here's a few different properties I'm setting. Add the device, and then this is this console right line and spitting out the information that's retrieved from NetBox. Simple as digging into the class itself. World's biggest constructor. All their properties here are optional, so you can set whichever ones you want. Comes with validation. It pulls the validation off the YAML file as well. So it will any apps you have validation with, it will validate according to NetBox standards. I highlight this one, deprecated stuff. I don't know if you can read this, but basically this also tells you which API versions it found them in. It can parse a series of YAML files through a series of versions of NetBox, and it's compatible across a wide range of versions. You can just parse one YAML file and it's compatible with one, or you can have plenty. And if it doesn't appear in the latest one, it'll mark it as obsolete, possibly obsolete, just to let you know you might be out of luck with that one. You might have some trouble with it. All the enums are taken care of. And of course, comments come up. So things like nested properties with enums are all taken care of, and they're common across all the classes. I did that one. Even though it's closed source, here's the actual call to the API client. I thought you might be interested just to see how it actually works. It's all done with generics. I can tell you that was a lot of fun working out. But yeah, basically any property, any nested property comes through this method. The API client also pulls in plugins. So here's the branch. This is pulled off the NetBox Cloud, my NetBox Cloud instance yesterday, actually. So it's marking it obsolete because I've got a newer version that wasn't pulled from NetBox Cloud and didn't have that plugin, but basically it still works. And being opinionated, at the moment, I don't use put or delete. I think they're too destructive, so I've basically marked those to throw an exception. You shall not pass is the gist of that. Moving back to CAD to NetBox. 2 use cases really, and it's on the website as well. Basically, you're either going to keep the sources of truth common between CAD and NetBox and run data between them. This is probably not a wrong one. This is, oh no, I wanted this one. Come on, boy, you know how to use this. You wrote it. What have I done? All right, it's not going to do. Well, it's missing from NetBox. That's why it's not going to do it. All righty. Sorry. This is I wanted to run a whole switch for you. This is a whole switch. I'm going to give you a better idea of highlighting when things go wrong. Something's missing, etc., etc. So that's a bit of an idea of the user interface anyway. The two use cases are keep all this data in sync, or if you're going to move away from drawings, get all the data in NetBox and make sure it's all okay, and off you go. The CAD drawings have been around for decades, probably not longer than I've been around, but maybe longer than some of you have been around. That's the gist of it. So any questions, let me know.
Well, thank you, Ewan. That's great. And if you do have any questions and you're watching, put them in the chat. I've got one question, which is maybe you could tell us a bit about the history of how this came about, because it looks like there's been a ton of work that's gone into this over some amount of time.
Yeah, it's about 2 or 3 years in the making so far. I work at Foxtel, Fox Sports. Foxtel is the Australia's cable television provider, and they started using NetBox because basically television stations have become data centers. The old Foxtel, before they moved away from video cables to being more or less a data center, had over 120,000 cables, and probably about 80,000 of those were video cables. But as we moved towards computer networks, etc., they started using NetBox to manage the typical IPAN DCIM thing. And the CAD drawings have been around for as long as Foxtel, which is early 2000s. It's longer than that. It's late 90s, actually. So getting the data from the CAD drawings was important because the data's already there. And rather than type the whole thing in again, they commissioned me to get the data out of the drawings and into NetBox. And we still use the drawings, so we keep them both in sync.
That makes sense. And you went for .NET. Now, what we see a lot, or like the primary language in the NetBox ecosystem is Python. Was .NET was that easier to work with Autodesk, or was it implied by Autodesk?
It is easier to work with AutoCAD, yeah. And Cable Scheduler already runs in .NET, and a lot of my plugins and stuff that I write for AutoCAD runs in .NET. It's just basically my tool of choice. So when you have a hammer, everything's a nail.
Great. All right. Well, Ewan, thank you very much. I enjoyed that presentation a lot. If anyone watching has any questions, you saw at the beginning of the presentation how to contact Ewan. You can always ping me if you've forgotten his email, and please drop any other questions for later on in the chat. We're probably going to have a little bit of time left, but now we're going to move to our second speaker. So let me just pull this up for a minute and go. I think there we go. Denis Rendler is going to be talking to us about simplifying infrastructure documentation with Terraform and NetBox. Denis, are you ready?
Hi. Yeah.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Sure. Oh my God. I might need to just reconnect for a second. It seems it's the first time I'm trying to share with Zoom.
Oh, yeah, that might be fun. Don't worry, we're not in a rush. We can wait until you figure out the security settings.
Be right back.
Yep.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. So, okay. Yeah. I think that's this one. Okay. So now let's make this a little smaller. Okay, thanks. So hi, I'm Denis Rendler. I'm an information security officer by day, and in my spare time, whatever is left, I write about at Ops Cafe about DevOps, DevSecOps, things I do that I find interesting or challenging, and take me a bit of time to research. So it's also all my notes, but it's also a way for me to give back to others who may encounter the same issues. And today I want to talk to you about a workflow I designed because, so as an information security officer, my role is basically to identify risks and to find tools, workflows to mitigate those risks, which leads me to a lot of testing, a lot of workflow designing, and that basically drives me to create a lot of virtual machines in my home lab especially. And with already 25 plus virtual environments that are running for my home needs, that kind of tends to be tedious. Always trying to match documentation, always try to want to know which API allocated, which is not, which system does a virtual environment have or not. So because I was already working with Terraform to manage my Proxmox instances, I thought, okay, let's check it out if there's a way to automate this, either through Ansible or through Terraform directly. And luck would have it that the team at Ebeningen, I hope I really don't mess up too much their name. I apologize for those. They have a provider for Terraform, which integrates a lot of the modules that are available in NetBox. Which this led me to designing this workflow, where basically a developer could request a new VM, could add a ticket to request a new VM into either ServiceNow, Jira, Service Desk, or whatever ticketing systems is being used. Then a technician reviews the ticket, adds any missing information, something like hosts, or where would the VM be deployed, other configuration, maybe modify it, because developers think about their product, but we also need to think about the entire system. So when everything is ready, the technician approves it. The ticketing system basically sends the information to the favorite CI. In my case, I'm using all of these. I'm using one way or another, which starts a Terraform pipeline to first create the virtual environment. And when that's finalized, we update the documentation to reflect the new system. So right now, out of the box, we have the documentation always up to date. We no longer think of the documentation of something nice to have. We have it already built into the pipelines. Any changes right now, if the developer comes in, okay, says I need more RAM, or I need a new software installed on my machine. Again, it creates a ticket, technicians approve it, and it gets automatically deployed. When this was in place, I thought, okay, so we have the documentation. Why not why not use that documentation to go a step further and, based on the documentation, actually deploy the machine? So I found out about Ansible EDA, which stands for Event-Driven Ansible. It's a system, an event-based system for Ansible. And with NetBox, great feature of webhook calling. Once the VM gets created inside the NetBox sends calls the webhook for the Ansible EDA, which starts the process and goes ahead and fetches configuration from the config context and goes ahead and actually configures the virtual environment. At the end, finally, it sends the notification to one of the favorite systems and update the ticket to reflect the status. I found this to be very, very helpful because right now we no longer have we documentation is no longer nice to have. It's something that's driving actually the infrastructure, right? So let's look at how would that script look like. So currently, so this is a project, a Terraform project, which so this one would be the step here. Currently I committed the Proxmox part. So I don't actually deploy the VM right now due to time constraints, but this can be switched out to with absolutely anything. Azure, we deployed on Azure, we deployed on AWS, and the rest of the code was for the NetBox was exactly the same. So using tfmod NetBox, first step is to collect the IDs for the sites and tenants that we're going to use. And then using the NetBox virtualization submodule from a Terraform module, I'm creating basically I'm pushing the data for the virtual machine inside NetBox. As you can see here, I'm hard coding some data. Keep in mind that this is a home lab environment for this demo. And one advantage of this module is that it's very user friendly. So instead of using IDs, I'm using names, which names are basically taken automatically from this here. And all you have to pass is the name, no longer the ID. This gets me to another great feature that I'll show in a moment. And so, yeah, continuing next, we create the disks, we create the network interface and add custom fields. Here, Mark, I think the custom object would be a great addition instead of having these fields. So maybe I will take a look at this when that becomes available. Then with the NetBox APAM submodule, I create the IP address, and finally I create with the NetBox primary IP submodule, I attach it to the VM's interface. So that's the entire pipeline basically to automate the documentation. So I prepared here because I don't have a ticketing system available. I prepared some just to simulate how would that go. So this now starts a pipeline. So we're simulating this workflow where the developer requests a new VM. It's sent to ServiceNow. ServiceNow then proceeds to initiate the pipeline. Pipeline is split into 4 steps: init, validate, plan, and apply, where we need the Terraform information. Basically, the backend, we configure it to use GitLab, this instance of GitLab as its backend. We then validate the information that we're being sent from the external system is valid, and it's valid Terraform configuration. So this, in the end, this is how it will look like. And after validation has been finished, we plan and then apply the Terraform configuration. At the end of this pipeline, we will have a new virtual machine. Go. It's a bit slower, like always when demos are running. Okay, so it's finished. So we now have new demo TF NetBox, the machine where we have the full information of it. the platform, the host where it's running, the cluster, site information, resource information. We also have additional information where environment type, login user for the operations team. We can even set a direct link to the host to open it up. That's I found that very useful. So disk, an interface, and in the config context we have the Ansible roles. And if we look now at our notification system, we see that new VM has been added, roles to be applied, new VM has been configured automatically, and because we attached, because of attaching an IP address to the VM is a two-step process, we also updated the machine, so another event was triggered to update. That's the additional message here. So now, if we simulate again a workflow where we add additional roles, so for example, add an Nginx, the pipelines will recommence, validate again the information, plan and apply, and at the end of it, we will see that the config context gets updated, and with it also gets into Ansible. So one other use case for the module is that I created a base configuration for my my home lab. I created a base configuration which I can apply again with the same Terraform, with the same module, and it allows me to, or actually I've tested this just recently when one of my servers died and took with him a lot of the VMs, including the NetBox instance I was having. And all it took me now afterwards was just to start a new VM with Ansible role I developed. I created a new NetBox instance, and then I just pushed this information back. So because I wasn't using any IDs for the roles or any other for tenants and so on, everything went smoothly, and from get-go in less than half an hour I was back online with the machine, the full machine of NetBox. Let's see here. So it finished. So we see that Ansible has started. VM NetBox has been updated, the new roles, and that's it. And in NetBox, we've seen it's been updated. There is a caveat, however, because of how mapping works in Golang, we cannot send an array of roles along with other types of variables, like something like an encrypted string, right? If we do this, we get an error, but we can still do this manually. So I guess the show. Oh, we're pushing an encrypted variable into NetBox. For example, a user ID or an identifier or something into config context. And now we'll see that like Ansible gets started, and when it goes through the playbook, it will also display our variable. Rules have been applied to be applied. Okay, so this is our encrypted hello netbox variable. So we can still use netbox to drive we can still use documentation, netbox specifically, to actually drive the infrastructure to continue. And regarding the error, unfortunately, we'll get a plan error. Come on. Let's see if I have another one. Yeah, so we get all map elements must have the same type. So that's kind of a restriction at the moment that I have on the module. And I'm looking into it to fix it, and probably will have a fix soon. Yeah, so that's how I managed to step from documentation. It's something to have, or something nice, something that we will have someday. To actually use documentation and be a great tool in our tool belt, either as DevOps or even InfoSec. Because as an information security officer, I very frequently go into NetBox to identify owners of the virtual environments and other information, contact information, for example, and so on. So it definitely allows for more flexibility. Also, when new colleagues join the team, there's no longer a long period of training, of just give them access to NetBox, and they know. Go to the virtual machine, go to the machine, get in contact with the owner, check if everything is resources are correctly mapped, check the software that's being installed, and so on. It definitely simplifies a lot of workload that a technician would have. Yeah, so resources wise, so if you want to check out the module is available only on GitHub at this time. The Ansible collection for the event-driven Ansible machine, if you want to use it, and more articles on Ops Cafe. So I'd like to give a big thank you to Ib Bruninger team for providing the Terraform provider for maintaining it. It's a great tool, and it does help a lot with this workflow. And last but not least, to the NetBox community and the team behind this great tool, which is definitely a big part now of my tool belt. Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
fantastic. Thank you, Denis. If anybody has any questions for Denis or for Ewen, drop them into the chat. I've got one question. Well, first of all, a comment. This is awesome. I love to see people taking NetBox and moving it from being a documentation to an intent. So the question is, when you've deployed those VMs, do you ever come across scenarios where somebody goes around the process and changes the VM? And then, what's in VMware or what's in Proxmox, for example, is different than the documentation. Is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, that's always an issue. Until now, the only solution we found is that we stop doing that. So there's no foolproof way. As long as anybody has access directly to the host,
Yeah.
it can always. I found solutions to mitigate this is by running cron jobs regularly. So yeah, if you go today and modify this outside of NetBox, outside of the normal deployment process, at midnight everything goes back to normal. So that's one way to force them to actually go, because when in the morning when they come back and say, okay, something has happened to that machine, and you find out why it happened, so it kind of forces the people into the right direction. Otherwise, it's it's always a problem as with having admin rights on a computer. as long as anyone has admin rights, you cannot stop them from doing action that shouldn't be done.
And one more question. So this is focused on VMs right now. Do you have any plans to expand it to other things like network devices or DHCP or?
Yeah, the module supports a lot of the modules. So it currently supports the let me check. So it supports the organization data, the rack, the devices, IPAM, and virtualization, and also customization part. Basically, I try to map all the APIs that's supported by the provider. I try to map them into submodules inside the module itself. So it does have a lot of customization. I do have to make an update. If you saw in NetBox, the drive size and memory are a bit misaligned because I needed to update the provider. I didn't manage to do this until now. So I need to update to the new version, and with that, we'll be adding a few other things. I'll try to maintain it as much as possible because right now it's not only used by me, it's only used by colleagues, it's used by friends in their environments and their companies. So it's starting to attract attention more than I initially thought of it. So yeah, we'll try to keep it up as much as I can.
This is a very familiar story where people either they're the person who installs NetBox in their organization, or they're the person who starts doing some automation, and then suddenly they are the network automation department.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much to you, Denis, and also to you, Ewen, especially for getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to come and talk to us. I've got one more slide and then we're going to sign off. So let's go here. This is the one, if you've been here before, we ask every time. If you would like to share your story at a NetBox community meetup, as I said, they're getting very popular. All you got to do is drop us a note. You can do that by sending me an email. I realize I didn't put my email on here. Is it here? It's not here either. It's in the chat in 1 minute when I find the chat. Okay, hold on. Oops. There. So if you drop me an email on that, you're going to give us a talk, we're more than happy to work with you ahead of time to figure out if the talk is right or if you want to change it around or something like that. But that's all we've got for today. If you want to find any of the news items that I shared earlier, go to netboxlabs.com/blog or /events. Most people in the community hang out in the NetDev Slack. If you're not already in there, you can go to netdev.chat. We hope to see you at the April call, which will be on the 15th at exactly the same time. I've double checked this despite the daylight savings changes that are going on, and I'm pretty sure it's correct, but keep an eye on netboxlabs.com/events for the correct information. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you again to our speakers, and we'll see you next month.
Thank
Goodbye.
Yes.